I'd like to take a step now towards politics. You mentioned the election. Obviously, the Huffington Post was a very important news source during that period. Of course, the very first question in the Obama presidency was directed to a Huffington Post reporter, which must have been quite an exciting moment, not only for social media in general and new media in general, but for you. How did it feel when the first question was asked of the Huffington Post reporter?
When it wasn't the first question of the press conference, but it was a question asked of Sam Stein, our White House correspondent, during the president's first press conference. I felt that it was really an acknowledgement by the president and the administration of the maturing of new media. I don't think it was just about the Huffington Post. I think it was really an acknowledgement of the role that new media had played in the election of Barack Obama. I mean, I would argue that were it not for the internet, Barack Obama would not be president. It wasn't just because of the new media, it was about the way that he used the internet to fundraise, to organize, to really break through just the traditional ways of doing politics. So in that sense, he wanted to demonstrate that he was also going to govern differently. And that's been harder than he and we thought. And there are still many attempts being made, to have a White House website that is much more transparent, to continue using the millions of people that had come together during the campaign to organize for legislation. It's still not at all where it can be, but there are different ways to govern that are being tried right now.
Which steps would you take personally, if you were in charge of the new media strategy at the White House, to gather that potential group together, those millions of people that supported him online?
Well, here's what is so interesting about that. You can't really galvanize people without a clear message. It's not just a function of technology. It's the combination of message and technology. And because the president's message around, let's say, the healthcare debate has been ambiguous, as he himself conceded, it's been much harder to organize around it. Because if you don't have a particular plan, but multiple plans, then it's hard to say to people, go knock on doors, go have parties and bring people together to campaign for the election of Barack Obama. Yeah, that's obvious. The passage of what? A plan with a public option, a plan without a public option, a plan with co-ops, a plan with insurance reform, So that has demonstrated the sort of weakness of organizing around an ambiguous message. At the same time, you see the conflict between transparency, which is an essential part of new media, and an administration's desire to keep decisions made behind locked doors and not really be as transparent as the administration had argued they would be during the campaign.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the themes of this particular program is the emergence of hierarchy via new media. And I'm wondering how you feel, whether you feel that new media, that the internet, that this very open platform, still hierarchy emerges. You have gatekeepers who may galvanize a public through messages, or they may be needed to gather people together. What do you think about the hierarchies that have emerged on the web?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we see what's happening with Wikipedia. Wikipedia is now going to have a sort of layer of editors. I believe in editors. I believe that the hybrid future that I'm envisioning is going to include millions of voices, but it's not going to eliminate editors. In fact, editors will be more important than ever in terms of sifting through these voices. Now, the editors are not all going to be professional editors. They can be editors whom the community has designated as editors, who've earned the trust of the community. But what is so different now is that for the first time, what is being debated is not being dictated by a hierarchy at the top of a newspaper or a television operation, but is really being much more organic in terms of what is on people's minds and what they care about and what they're passionate about.
Some might argue, though, that the Huffington Post itself has emerged as one of the new gatekeepers through the aggregation, through the investigative journalism that you're beginning to fund. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that we are putting an enormous amount of effort and resources into citizen journalism. Our new project of Eyes and Ears, for example, is every day putting questions and raising issues with our community, which is now about 23 million people, and which is very active and very engaged. And we get tremendous information coming from them. At the same time, we see with the new tool that we introduced called Social News, that is in conjunction with Facebook, that we are creating a kind of digital water cooler where people can see at a glance what their friends are reading, what their friends are commenting on, and their friends can see what they're reading, although there is also a stealth function, so that if you are reading something you don't want your friends to see, you can actually click the stealth function and then you can read in peace and without anybody knowing. But that is another new way to interact around news, because people don't want just to consume news. They want to engage with news. They want to sort of talk back and give their own opinion around what they're reading.
One of the criticisms of information on the web and how people gather on the web is that they gather in order to confirm their own opinions, that there's almost a cyber balkanization, as it were. And I'm wondering how you feel about that. Do you envisage that people will simply seek out that information? They come to the Huffington Post for a particular type of information. They go to the Drudge Report for another type of information. What effects do you see that having in the future on how we consume, and in fact the social effects on our attitudes and opinions?
Well, at the Huffington Post, one of our big editorial goals is to get beyond the right-left way of looking at the world. We welcome different opinions. We challenge the way that journalists refer to what's happening in terms of right versus left. And we argue consistently that the big issues of our time cannot be seen through the right-left prism. Let me give you some examples. Afghanistan. You can no longer say, either in England or in the States, that those who oppose our military engagement in Afghanistan are on the left. George Will, one of our most conservative commentators, has recently come out and said that American troops should leave Afghanistan. So those who continue to look at this issue through that prism are really stuck in a paradigm that's obsolete. Healthcare. Why are you supposed to be on the left if you want some form of universal healthcare? There are many, many businesses that recognize that without some form of universal healthcare, their own healthcare costs are increasing to the point where they're going bankrupt. Wall Street. There are many editorials in the Wall Street Journal that argue against what has happened with the bailout of firms like Goldman Sachs and Citigroup that are now making multi-billion-dollar profits while still receiving taxpayer guarantees. And those who believe in free markets, no, that's not free market capitalism. That's basically a form of oligopoly where the government picks winners and losers and where you socialize losses and privatize gains. So you know what I'm saying? There's a hugely fascinating re-examination of the biggest issues of our time and how we approach them, and to keep looking at them through right versus left, or is this a right-wing side or is the left-wing side, is to really miss the ferment that's going on at the moment.
And additionally, some people may say that the new media is challenging this notion of nations, even. You know, the idea that whether we're looking right versus left or whether we're simply saying that this is the US perspective or the UK perspective. Do you see new media? Do you see the Huffington Post as dealing with an international audience, dealing with an audience that's engaged at a different level than, say, people who are in the United States?
Well, of course, that's in the nature of the technology, that we can reach people anywhere. And it's actually really wonderful when our bloggers will often write to me and say, I can't believe that, you know, my high school teacher who now lives in Australia has read my blog and I reconnected. And that's, of course, one of the most exciting things about the web, the fact that you don't know who you're communicating with and how far they are. They are brought right next to you. Because of the way we can now communicate.
Those aspects, though, that you mentioned before of the social media, the transparency, the accountability, the immediacy, some may even argue that those are very American points of view, that it's a Western idealism that's in fact being pressed out across the web. You mentioned Iran, for example, and how they've locked down the web, or China. That's big stories about how they've locked down the web. Do you see a problem with this notion of the American imperialism and these ideals being spread out? Or do you think that, how do you feel about that?
I think that everyone will benefit from the spread of transparency, immediacy, and accountability through the web. I think these are forces definitely for good. And that's why so many totalitarian regimes are resisting them and doing everything they can. And sometimes it's pretty complicated to block the free flow of information on the internet.